guys, it's Kerri and I'm back with another tutorial. This time we are going to be working on watercolour Christmas card designs. So if you've had a look at some of my other videos, I have shown you how to do some quick and easy watercolour wreaths. This time we're going to work on an idea for a Christmas card, a loose watercolour again, but using holly leaves and some other foliage this time. So what I'm starting off with is I'm using my pencil to do a really light rough sketch on the page just to give me the design, the layout that I'm going to use. So I'm actually going to work with some holly leaves to start off with, and I'm working really lightly, and that's really important because I'm going to leave this underneath. So I'm not going to remove this, I'm actually going to leave it on the page under the watercolour. So I'm going to just sketch on the leaves. I'm not looking here for a perfect shape or idea, I'm literally just sketching out a really light rough idea. The next stage I'm going to use my number 6 round, and I'm going to make a nice batch here of the olive green. And what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to introduce it onto the holly leaves. So I'm working with a loaded brush full of watercolour here in the olive green, and I'm using the same loaded brush to pull the watercolour all around. So I'm not reloading the brush, I'm using what's on the brush and pulling it around the first holly leaf here. So I'm just pulling it around, and you'll start to notice the brush is getting dry as I move along, and it's getting lighter on this side over here. But I'm just now going to shape up the holly leaf to the shape that I want. There we go. So once I'm happy with the shape, I'm going to move then on to the next holly leaf. So I'm going to reload the brush in this lovely green, and I'm going to move over to this side this time, and again I'm using one brush load of watercolour and pulling it around the edge of the holly leaf. I'm just going to then fill the holly leaf. I haven't reloaded the brush, this is the same brush load of watercolour here, just pulling it around. There we go, and then I'm going to shape up the edge of the leaves. So this, you'll see, is just a quick and easy idea to create watercolour designs for Christmas cards. So once you've shaped up the edges to how you want them, then I'm going to come back onto this holly leaf here, and I'm just going to, whilst it's still quite wet, introduce the green, the same shade of green, but I'm introducing a second layer to one side, and I'm just going to encourage it to move around. So I'm going to reload the brush, same colour, but just a secondary layer of it, and I'm just encouraging it to move around. Once I've got enough on the brush, I'm going to clean the brush, dry the brush, and then with just a tiny amount of water that's left on the brush after I've stroked off most of it, I'm then moving the rest of that watercolour around the leaf. So it's pulling it across there. And the paper that I'm working on is just practice paper. Okay, so this is just a really cheap watercolour paper. This isn't my special rough paper, this is a cheap practice paper. So this one here now, I've got that lovely blended effect moving into the lighter shade. This is a very one-tone one at the moment, so I'm going to introduce a bit more depth onto this one. So again, I'm working whilst it's still lightly damp. It's not solidly wet, so it's not moving around as much, but it's still damp, so it's just slightly moving. And I'm just going to pull it across a little bit and shape up those edges. And then what I'm going to do is clean the brush, dry the brush, and then with just that small amount that's on the brush, I'm just moving up to the edge of the green and pulling it along. Okay, so I dried the brush, cleaned it, dried it, and then what's left on the brush is moving this here and pulling it across. So when that dries, then it will have a shaded effect coming along. Now the reason why I've done these two here is to give a little bit of time for those to slightly dry so that I can do the one at the back. Now the one at the back I'm going to actually change the shade of green. So I'm working with the green that I was using before, but I'm introducing another shade of green so that it's going to be slightly darker in colour and slightly different in colour. So I'm going to do a similar thing as I've done before, pulling it around. When I get to the holly leaf on this side, I'm just really gently coming around, and I've left a tiniest white gap. Hopefully you can see that, because I don't want it blending into the holly leaf. So now I'm going to work with what's on the brush, pull it around, shape up the edge here. I'm just going to move the brush around, pulling the green around. I haven't reloaded the brush, I'm still working with what's on the brush. It's so tempting to keep reloading, but I'm just moving around what's here. And that gives me that lovely shading that I want. Just shaping up the edge there. So once I'm happy with that, I'm going to bring some more of that tone to this side here, just dropping it in and moving it around. Just from the top, moving down, again picking up some more, bringing it down this side here. And then I'm going to clean the brush, dry the brush, and then with what's left on the brush, I'm just going to phase out on this side. Just some light circular motions. I'm just going to dry that brush again because I don't feel like it's as dry as I want it to be. So then I'm going to move it around and pull it across. Just going to change that point up there. And obviously the watercolour will keep moving and it will lighten up as it dries as well. So what you see now won't be exactly what will be there when it dries, because it does lighten up. So if you want it to be any darker than it already is, now's the chance to do it. So with this one I can see that there was more water on this side than I want there to be, and I can notice that now, which means I can fix it now. So I'm just going to move the watercolour around slightly. I haven't done anything, I haven't reloaded the brush or anything like that. I'm working with a dry brush, and it's just moving around using what's already on the page. So I'm just pulling the colour around. There we go. So I'm happy with those now. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to introduce some background foliage. So for that I'm just going to make myself a little brown, but I think I'm going to go a bit darker, so I'm going to add some Payne's grey to the brown just to make it a really deep brown. And then I'm going to decide where I want to have those bits of foliage. So I think I'm going to want something about here, possibly here, and something maybe here. I feel like to balance it up I want a bit there as well. So I'm not doing any solid lines, I'm using broken lines, and I'm just introducing where I'm going to have that foliage. And then I'm going to create some greens that I'm going to work with. So for this one I'm going to have quite a fresh green at the top there. And then this is where I'm going to work quite carefully so that I don't go over the holly leaves, but I'm working again in lots of dash lines. I'm not filling in any particular manner, I'm just working in dash lines. And I'm happy to go over the brown. I don't mind it blending with the brown, I quite like it doing that, so I'm going over the brown. I'm not waiting for it to dry, I'm going over where the brown is. I'm moving the brush in different directions as well, so that I've got some that are pointed ends, some that are more jagged ends. If you want to, you can at this stage turn the page so that you can get that foliage the way that you want it to be. So just using, and for this I am reloading the brush every now and then, So I'm letting it, I'm using the different depths of colour. I'm reloading the brush now and then, but I am allowing different depths of the colour by using the brush more than once with just one load on it. So once you're happy that you've got that base coat there of the shade of green that you want, it's time to introduce another shade of green. So I'm going to keep it with the base of that green there, and then I'm going to introduce a bit of the olive green to that. And the brush is quite heavily loaded with water there, so I'm just taking off a few of the drips, and I'm going to come back in and start filling some of those gaps now. And this is where I start to fill it to the level that I want it to be filled. So I still want there to be some white spaces, but I'm thinking now about how I want the shape to be, and also where I want the white spaces to be and where I want it filled. So this is the chance I've got now to pull it all together. So I'm just, if you notice you get drips on your brush, which is where I've overloaded the water there, make sure you take those off. The last thing you want is for a drip to fall onto your work. There we go. Just gonna bring these to this area here. So it's a really quick and easy design. I mean, this isn't taking very long at all to pull together, and it's a loose watercolour design, so it doesn't need to be in any way perfect. You can play around with it, you can change the layout of it. I'm going to need a little bit more of that green there, I think. And again, you could use different foliage styles here. But I do think one of the important things is to have a nice variation of the shades of green that you're using if you're doing the foliage designs. There we go. So at this point, I would recommend that you leave it to dry before introducing the berries. But as usual with my videos, I need to sort of finish it off so you can see the end product. So I'm going to go ahead and put the berries on. But obviously I would recommend that you leave it to dry before you introduce the berries. Now when I do the berries, I like to leave a small white circle on the berry, and I'm just popping the berries in where I want them. Now I would have a lot more berries on this page here, but obviously because it's not dry, I don't want to be layering up at this second. I would be happy to layer and put them slightly on top of the green areas if it was dry, but obviously right now it's not as dry as it needs to be, so I will just do a couple more just to give the effect of where the berries are going to be. So I'm going to stop there and I'll finish this off at another time. So you would let this completely dry, and then you've got either a beautiful loose watercolour piece that you could use on a card, or you can take it to the next stage. So if you wanted to, you could introduce some vein leaves in the watercolour. So you could use your watercolour brush and bring in the leaves of the holly, the veins of the holly, onto this. Or if you don't want to leave it as plain watercolour, loose watercolour, you can do what I always like to do with mine. And here's one I've done earlier. You can introduce your fine liner, and you can start working with your broken lines over the top, and you can introduce your veins onto your holly leaves in that way. Okay, so again, broken lines, not using any solid lines. I'm just using broken up lines here, and I'm just giving a bit of depth, really quick movements. The quick movements help to stop me from doing lines that are too rigid and too straight. So for this area where I want it to look like it's spiky, I'm doing spiky, what I call spiky lines. So I'm moving around in different directions, but they mainly have points. Where the holly leaves are, I do circular motions to introduce the idea of it being circular berries. There we go. So I'm just moving that around. For the holly leaves, I'm just overlapping the lines, and then I'm highlighting those veins with some movements there. I feel like I want that slightly darker on those. Again, coming back in with those rough, spiky lines for the foliage around there, and here as well. Rough, quick, spiky lines. I'm not going for any lines that are directly adjoining the watercolour. We want broken, rough lines moving around. And again, we want some of them not on any of the watercolour at all. It brings it all together by doing some that aren't at all connected to watercolour. There we go. And I am happy. Fantastic. So I like the design like this. So you can have it, as I say, you can have it with the black overlay like so, or you can go for a more watercolour, loose watercolour look. And if you want to, when it's dry, you can add a secondary layer of the watercolour just to give it even more depth. It's completely up to you on the idea of how you want to go forward with these ones. And then again, if you've got the time and if you want to, you can use your calligraphy and hand lettering skills to add season's greetings, Merry Christmas, etc. So I hope you found this tutorial useful, this little demonstration, again on watercolour Christmas cards. If you've got any suggestions or recommendations of different designs that you want me to have a go at in this style, then let me know and I'll do my best. I hope you've enjoyed watching. Take care. Bye.